The wind kicked up dust, carrying the smell of cattle as I rode into Welton that September afternoon. My horse was worn out, and I needed water, maybe a decent meal, before heading out again. What I found in the main square made me completely forget about hunger. A crowd was bunched up around a makeshift wooden platform. Men were yelling numbers, waving hats, some even jumping to get attention. In the middle of that chaos, 3 young women stood side by side, in simple but clean dresses. The oldest held her head high, pine-colored hair shining in the sun. The middle one had her arms crossed, jaw tight in silent defiance. The youngest stared at the ground, a sunburnt neck showing days of hard work. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. A fat man in a striped vest climbed onto the platform holding a small hammer. Gentlemen, we have here 3 hard-working young ladies, all from the Hartwell family. We'll start the bidding at $200 for the whole lot. My stomach twisted. This wasn't cattle being auctioned. These were people, women being sold as property in broad daylight, right in the town square. 300, a grizzled rancher yelled. 400, another man called out, fanning himself with his hat. I slowly dismounted my horse, tying the reins to the nearest post. Nobody paid me any mind, just another dusty traveler arriving in town. I walked through the crowd, watching the buyers' faces. Some looked like honest farmers looking for domestic help. Others had looks that made my fists clench. The oldest of the 3 women lifted her chin even higher as the bids went past $500. Her eyes met mine for a moment. There were no tears there, just a fierce determination that reminded me of someone I'd rather forget. $600! The auctioneer struck his hammer once. We have 600. Anyone else for the services of these hard-working young ladies? A woman in black approached the platform. Gray hair pulled into a tight bun, face marked with bitter wrinkles. She waved to the auctioneer, who leaned down to hear something whispered. Ah, yes! The man straightened up. Widow Hartwell informs me these young ladies know how to cook, sew, care for animals, and run a house. They are orphans, with no family to claim them. A clean transaction, gentlemen. The middle sister finally exploded. We are William Hartwell's daughters, and he's not dead. Her voice cut through the air like a whip. This woman sold us based on a lie. The crowd mumbled, some men looking uncomfortable for the first time. Widow Hartwell climbed onto the platform with surprising agility for her age. Isabel has always been troublesome, she said, her voice sweet as poisoned honey. William Hartwell died of fever last winter. These girls have nowhere to go and no way to support themselves. It's an act of charity to find them working homes. Liar! The girl, Isabel, stepped forward, but the oldest sister held her arm. Victoria, let go. I won't let that witch. Enough. The oldest sister's voice was low but firm. It won't do any good, Isabel. The auctioneer hit his hammer again. $700! Last chance, gentlemen. I looked at the youngest sister, who still kept her eyes down. Her shoulders trembled slightly. I thought of my own sister, whom I hadn't been able to save years ago. I thought of the men in the crowd and what they would do with 3 young women bought as property. I climbed onto the platform before I could change my mind. $1,000, I said, my voice carrying across the square. The silence was immediate. All eyes turned to me, a road-dirty stranger with long hair and a scar running from my left temple to my chin. It didn't look like I had $1,000 in my pocket, and I was right. The auctioneer blinked several times. Sir, did you say $1,000? I did, but I'm not buying them. The words came out before I could think better of it. I'm setting them free. The crowd erupted in indignant shouts. Men started moving toward the platform, faces red with anger. Widow Hartwell glared at me, her eyes narrowed to slits. Who do you think you are? She hissed. Marcus Sterling. I took off my hat, giving an exaggerated bow. And I've just found out that William Hartwell is still alive. The chaos that followed was instant. Voices rose from all sides, some demanding explanations, others yelling that I was lying. Widow Hartwell visibly paled, but quickly recomposed her mask of indignation. That's absurd. My husband died in my arms. Curious, I replied, crossing my arms, because I spoke to a salt merchant in Ridge Creek, who told me he saw William Hartwell alive 2 weeks ago. Sick, but alive. Apparently, he's in a cabin 4 days from here, recovering from pneumonia. Victoria looked at me with an expression that mixed hope and disbelief. Isabel's eyes were wide, fists clenched. Sophia finally raised her head, and I saw she had eyes the color of a winter sky. "You're lying!" The widow climbed onto the platform, pointing a bony finger at me. "This man is a swindler trying to steal legitimate property." "Property?" I let the word hang in the air. "We're talking about people, ma'am. Daughters of a man who, as far as I understand, still breathes." The town sheriff finally appeared, pushing his way through the crowd. He was a short, chubby man with a faded star on his vest. "What in tarnation is going on here?" The widow was the first to speak. "This stranger is trying to disrupt a legal auction with lies about my deceased husband." "He's not deceased," I interrupted. "And I can prove it." I pulled a yellowed piece of paper from my pocket. It was just a list of supplies I had bought in Ridge Creek, but from a distance it looked official. Signed testimony from the merchant who saw William Hartwell 2 weeks ago. The sheriff took the paper, frowning as he pretended to read. Clearly, he wasn't a literate man, but he wasn't going to admit that publicly. He mumbled, as if considering complex evidence. "Sheriff Morrison," the widow said, her voice sweetened. "You've known my family for years. You know I'm an honest woman. This stranger appeared out of nowhere with papers that could have been forged by anyone." Victoria stepped forward. "If our father is alive, we want to see him." "Victoria," Isabel whispered urgently. "What if it's a lie? What if it's just another man trying to—" "Then at least we'll know the truth," Victoria replied, still staring at me. "Mr. Sterling, if you're telling the truth, prove it. Take us to him." I felt the weight of all the choices that had led me to that moment. I could get on my horse and keep going, leaving those 3 women to their fate. It would be safer, more sensible. But I looked at Sophia, who watched me with eyes full of fragile hope, and I knew I couldn't live with myself if I left. "All right," I replied, "but it won't be easy. 4 days of travel through rough territory." The sheriff returned the paper, still pretending to have understood its contents. "Looks like we have a tricky situation here. Proposal: if Mr. Sterling can prove William Hartwell is alive, the auction is canceled. If I can't, I'll come back and pay for the damages caused." I finished his sentence. It was a gamble I couldn't afford to lose, but I couldn't back down either. Widow Hartwell gave me a look that could melt iron. "Very well, but I want 2 witnesses to accompany you, to ensure there's no trickery." "No," Victoria said firmly. "If we're going to do this, we do it alone. I won't be escorted like a criminal." "Victoria," Sophia spoke for the first time, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "What if he's lying? What if he's just another man who wants—" "Then we'll find that out too," Victoria replied, putting her hand on her younger sister's shoulder. "But I can't live the rest of my life not knowing if Dad really died or if we were sold based on a lie." Isabel finally uncrossed her arms. "I'll go. Even if it's a lie, even if it's dangerous, anything is better than being sold like cattle." The sheriff scratched his prominent belly. "Well, technically, until the situation is resolved, these young ladies are in city custody. Mr. Sterling, do you take responsibility for them during this expedition?" "I do." The words came out more easily than I expected. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Some men seemed relieved to avoid a complicated purchase, others clearly disappointed to lose the opportunity. Widow Hartwell descended the platform with rigid movements of suppressed anger. "Regret this choice," she whispered as she passed us. "Some truths are more painful than lies." When we were alone in the square, Victoria turned to me. "Mr. Sterling, I need to ask you a direct question. Why are you doing this? What do you gain by helping us?" I looked at the 3 sisters, Victoria with her natural leadership, Isabel with her righteous anger, Sophia with her brave vulnerability. They were strangers to me, but something about their situation echoed old wounds in my chest. "Maybe because someone should have done the same for my sister years ago," I replied. "Maybe because no woman should be sold as property. Maybe because you deserve to know the truth about your father." Sophia took a few hesitant steps toward me. "What if he really is dead? What if we find out Widow Hartwell was telling the truth? Then at least you'll know for sure," I replied, "and you'll have chosen your own fate instead of having it decided by others." Victoria extended her hand toward me. "Then we have a deal, Mr. Sterling. Take us to our father, Dead or alive, we want the truth. I shook her hand, feeling the calluses of hard work on her palms. We leave at dawn. Bring only what you can carry. The journey will be tough. As I watched them walk away to gather their few belongings, I felt a mix of determination and apprehension. I was betting everything on a piece of information I'd casually overheard from a possibly drunk merchant. But looking back at the square where moments before 3 women were being auctioned like cattle, I knew I had made the only choice I could live with. The sun was setting over Welton as I went to borrow a wagon and supplies for the journey. 4 days through tough territory, carrying 3 women who trusted me based on little more than words and hope. I wasn't sure what we'd find at the end of the trip, but I knew I couldn't leave them behind. Morning arrived with low fog and the smell of rain in the air. The 3 sisters waited for me at the edge of town with a single bag between them. Victoria wore a practical brown dress, her hair braided back. Isabel had chosen clothes that allowed free movement, her jaw still set. Sophia carried a small rag doll, the only sign of her youth. "Ready?" I asked, helping them into the wagon. "Ready," Victoria replied for all of them. We left Welton behind as the sun rose, its last houses disappearing into the road dust. Ahead of us, 4 days of uncertain travel. Behind us, a life none of them wanted anymore. And somewhere on the horizon, answers that would change everything forever. The road wound through hills covered in dry grass and red rocks. Our wagon moved at a steady but careful pace. There was no hurry that justified risking a broken axle in unknown territory. The first few hours passed in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Victoria sat beside me on the driver's bench, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Isabel and Sophia shared the back of the wagon among the supplies I'd managed to gather the night before. "Mr. Sterling," Victoria finally broke the silence. "Can you tell us more about this merchant who saw our father?" I kept my eyes on the road, weighing my words. Older man, traded salt and spices. Said William was in a cabin near Pine Ridge, recovering from a lung ailment. Thin, weakened, but alive. "How did he know it was our father?" Isabel asked from the back. "He asked his name when he bought medical supplies. William Hartwell isn't a common name around here." Sophia leaned forward. Did he mention anything about us? Did Dad ask about his daughters?" The hope in her voice squeezed my chest. "He didn't mention it, but a sick man might not be thinking clearly." The truth was, I was building the story as we went. The merchant existed, and I really had heard the name William Hartwell. But the details were my own creation, based on the hope that somewhere in those hills, a sick father was waiting for daughters he believed lost. Around midday, we stopped near a stream to rest the horses and eat a simple meal. Victoria handed out bread and dried meat she'd brought from Welton, while Sophia washed her face in the cool water. "Do you have other relatives?" I asked, sitting on a rock near the bank. "Just Dad," Victoria replied. "Our mother died when Sophia was 5. Dad married widow Hartwell 2 years later." "Biggest mistake of his life," Isabel muttered, skipping rocks across the water with unnecessary force. "She wasn't always cruel," Sophia said softly. "At first, she tried to be good to us, but after Dad got sick, she showed who she really was," Isabel finished. "She always looked at us like we were a burden. When he died, she didn't waste any time getting rid of us." Victoria sat on the grass, removing her shoes to dip her feet in the water. "Mr. Sterling, can you tell me why a stranger would risk so much to help people he doesn't even know?" It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer, at least partially. "I had a sister once," I began, watching the water run over the stones. "Younger than me, blonde hair like ripe corn. When our parents died, I tried to take care of her myself. I wasn't much more than a boy, but I thought I could." The 3 sisters had stopped what they were doing, their full attention on my words. "One day, I went hunting because we had no more food. When I came back, she was gone. I searched for weeks, asked everyone in the area. Finally, I found out that a trafficker had taken her. He sold young women to brothels in the big cities." Sophia covered her mouth with her hands. Isabel stopped throwing rocks. Victoria just looked at me, waiting for the rest of the story. "I never found her," I finished. "I never knew if she survived, if she managed to escape, if she had a life after that." The silence stretched between us. broken only by the sound of the running water. "That's why you helped us," Victoria said finally. "It wasn't a question. That's why I couldn't let you be sold," I confirmed. "Maybe I can't save my sister, but I can try to stop other women from going through the same thing." Isabel got up and came to sit near me. "What was her name?" "Your sister?" "Sarah." The name came out as a whisper. "Sarah Sterling. If we find her someday, we'll tell her brother never stopped looking," Sophia said, her voice firm despite her youth. Something stirred in my chest, an emotion I had buried deep years ago. These three women, who had lost as much as I had, offering comfort to a stranger. "Thank you," I murmured, not trusting my voice to say more. We resumed the journey with a new understanding between us. We were no longer a group of strangers united by circumstance. We were people who understood loss, who knew what it meant to have family unjustly torn away. The afternoon brought heavy clouds and the first sign of rain. I quickened the horse's pace, hoping to find shelter before the storm hit full force. The first drops began to fall just as we spotted a rock formation that offered partial protection. We guided the wagon under the overhanging rocks just as the rain truly began. Thick curtains of water obscured the landscape, turning the road into slippery mud. "Looks like we'll spend the night here," I said, helping the sisters down from the wagon. Victoria looked around the makeshift shelter. "I've slept in worse places." "Me too," Isabel agreed, wringing water from her hair. Sophia was trembling, more from cold than fear. Without thinking, I took off my coat and put it over her shoulders. It was too big for her, but offered warmth. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling the coat tighter. We spent the night sharing stories around a small fire we managed to keep lit despite the dampness. Victoria told us about her childhood taking care of her younger sisters. Isabel talked about her dreams of seeing the ocean someday. Sophia sang a song her mother used to sing, her sweet voice echoing among the rocks. I found myself telling more about Sarah than I had shared with anyone in years. How she laughed when I tried to cook and burned everything. How she collected pretty stones she found in the creek near our house. How she made me promise I would always take care of her, no matter what. "You kept your promise," Victoria said when I finished. "Maybe not the way you expected, but you're taking care of her by taking care of us." The rain continued through the night, but our small cave remained dry. In the morning, we found a world washed clean and bright, the air smelling of renewed earth and new growth. The morning of the third day brought a clear sky and the smell of pine trees in the air. We were approaching the mountains, where the merchant said he had seen William Hartwell. My stomach churned with nervousness, not just from the uncertainty of what we would find, but from the growing realization that these three women completely trusted me. Sophia had developed a cough during the night. Initially, I thought it was just the cold mountain air, but when I stopped the wagon to check, I felt a fever on her forehead. "It's nothing," she insisted, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "Just a cold." Victoria and Isabel exchanged worried glances. They knew their sister better than I did, and clearly didn't believe it was just a cold. "Sophia has always been delicate," Victoria explained as she rearranged the blankets to make her more comfortable. "When she was little, any change in weather would make her sick for weeks." Isabel knelt beside her sister, placing a hand on her forehead. "She's hot. Marcus, we need to find medical help." I looked around the mountainous landscape. We were at least a day from any town, and Pine Ridge was still several hours away. Sophia tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness made her collapse back against the makeshift cushions. "I'll be fine," she murmured, but her lips were starting to turn blue. "No, you won't," I said firmly. "We need to keep going, but slowly. If she gets worse, we'll have to stop completely." Victoria took my hand. "Marcus, answer me honestly. How much truth is there in this story about our father? Because if Sophia dies chasing a lie..." The question I feared had finally arrived. I looked at Victoria, then at Isabel, who watched me with narrowed eyes of growing suspicion. Sophia was too sick to participate in the conversation, but I could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on my chest. "The truth is complicated," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I heard the name William Hartwell from a merchant in Ridge Creek. He mentioned a sick man in a cabin near Pine Ridge. I can't guarantee it's your father." "So you took us out of Welton based on a possibility?" Isabel stood up, fists clenched. Sophia could die because of your gamble? Isabel, Victoria said softly. Let him finish. I took a deep breath, knowing that the next words would determine whether they would continue with me or demand to return to town. When I saw you on that platform, being sold like cattle, I couldn't just keep going. The story about your father, it was the only way I could think of to get you out of there. But that doesn't mean it's a lie. There's a real possibility that William Hartwell is alive. Sophia opened her eyes, focusing on me with effort. You lied? I didn't lie. I exaggerated the certainty I had. There's a difference. Victoria stood up, walking a few steps away from the wagon. I could see her mind processing the implications. Isabel stared at me with anger, but also with something that might have been understanding. So you risked everything on a possibility, Isabel said finally. Why? Because the alternative was to let you be sold to men who would see you as property, because even a small chance of finding your father was better than the certainty of being treated like slaves. Sophia tried to sit up again, leaning on Isabel's arm. If Dad isn't there, if we're chasing ghosts, at least we chose our own destiny. Victoria turned, her eyes shining with unshed tears. What if he really is dead? What if we find only an empty cabin? Then we'll face that together, I replied, and we'll decide what to do from there. The silence stretched between us, broken only by Sophia's labored breathing. Finally, Victoria returned to the wagon. We continue, she said, but if Sophia gets worse, we stop immediately, no matter how close we are. We resumed the journey with new urgency. Sophia dozed fitfully between Victoria and Isabel, who took turns wetting her forehead with cool water. The road became steeper and rockier as we climbed the mountains. Around midday, we stopped near a stream to water the horses and check on Sophia. Her fever had risen, and she was occasionally delirious, calling out for people who weren't there. "Mama," she murmured. "Mama, where are you?" Victoria held her sister's hand, humming softly the same song Sophia had sung the night before. Isabel walked over to where I was checking the wagon wheels. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice low so Victoria wouldn't hear. "Sophia almost died when she was little. Pneumonia. The doctor said her lungs were weak after that. If this fever continues..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. I looked at the fragile girl in the wagon, remembering my own sister when she got sick. The feeling of helplessness was the same, the terrible certainty that there was nothing I could do to stop the suffering. "How long until Pine Ridge?" Isabel asked. 3, maybe 4 hours if we keep this pace." "What if we push the horses?" 2 hours, but we risk breaking something, and the fast movement might worsen her condition. Isabel bit her lip, conflict clear on her face. "Do whatever you think is best. Just don't let her die because of a search that might lead nowhere." We continued at a moderate pace, stopping every hour to check on Sophia. Her condition remained stable but worrying. Victoria didn't leave her side, whispering words of encouragement and childhood memories. "Remember when we found that injured baby rabbit?" Victoria murmured. "You insisted on taking care of it until it got better. You said all creatures deserved a chance to live." Sophia smiled weakly. Did it live?" "It lived and had a whole litter of bunnies. Dad said you had a special gift for healing broken things." The mention of their father brought a new weight to the moment. We were chasing a man who might not even exist, while one of the daughters he supposedly loved battled fever. The sun was low on the horizon when we finally spotted Pine Ridge. It was smaller than I expected, maybe a dozen houses scattered around a single main street. To my relief, there was a sign indicating a doctor. "Sophia first," Victoria said when I suggested looking for information about William Hartwell. "Everything else can wait." The doctor was an elderly man with gentle hands and a reassuring voice. He examined Sophia carefully while the 3 of us waited in the makeshift waiting room. "Early pneumonia," he diagnosed. "Treatable, but she needs complete rest for at least a week, maybe 2. Victoria collapsed into a chair. "A week. We have nowhere to stay, no money to pay for lodging for that long." The doctor looked at us curiously. "Are you travelers? Where do you come from?" "Welton," I replied. "We're looking for a man named William Hartwell. We heard he might be in a nearby cabin, recovering from illness." The doctor's face lit up with recognition. "William. Of course, I know him well. I treated him for pneumonia a month ago. He's much better now, but still weak. My heart almost stopped. After days of uncertainty, of building hopes on vague possibilities, discovering that William Hartwell actually existed and was alive was almost surreal. Are you relatives? The doctor asked, noticing our reaction. We're his daughters, Victoria whispered, tears finally overflowing. We were told he had died. Dead? Who told you that? William talks about his daughters constantly. He's desperate to find them. Isabel stood up abruptly. Where? Where is he? Mackenzie's cabin about 2 miles from here. But listen. The doctor raised his hand as we all started moving toward the door. William is better, but still recovering, and this young lady, he gestured to Sophia, needs immediate rest. Take me to him, Sophia said, trying to sit up from the cot. Please. If Dad's alive, I need to see him. The doctor shook his head. Absolutely not. Movement now could turn treatable pneumonia into a fatal condition. Victoria knelt beside the cot. Sophia, you need to stay here. Isabel and I will go see Dad and come back with news. And me? Sophia looked at me. Marcus, are you going to abandon your search now that you're so close? It was a complex question. Technically, my part was done. I had brought the sisters near their father. They no longer needed me. But looking at Sophia, sick and vulnerable, and at Victoria and Isabel, who were still processing the realization that their father was alive, I knew I couldn't simply leave. I'm not going anywhere, I replied. Not until I'm sure all of you are safe. The doctor arranged a room in the back of his house for Sophia, and Victoria insisted on staying with her for the first night. Isabel and I went to the local tavern to get rooms and more detailed information about William Hartwell. He arrived here 2 months ago, the tavern owner told us. More dead than alive, talking nonstop about 3 daughters he had lost. He said his wife had lied to him, made him believe the girls had run away. Lied how? I asked. Apparently, she said the daughters had left with a traveling merchant, that they no longer wanted to live on a poor farm. William believed it, but when he recovered from his illness, he started to question the story. He found out no merchant had passed through the area at that time. Isabel clenched her fists. So she made it all up. Made us believe he was dead while convincing him that we had abandoned him. Clever woman, the owner commented dryly. She got rid of her stepdaughters without seeming completely cruel. We spent the night planning how to approach William. Isabel wanted to go immediately, but I convinced her to wait until morning, when Sophia was stable enough to be alone with the doctor for a few hours. Morning arrived clear and cold. Sophia was better, fever low but still present. Victoria decided to stay with her, while Isabel and I made the walk to Mackenzie's cabin. The cabin was small but well kept, surrounded by tall pine trees. Smoke rose from the chimney, and I could see movement through the windows. My heart pounded as we approached the door. Isabel stopped a few yards before the entrance. What if he doesn't recognize us? What if the illness changed him too much? Then we'll remind him who you are, I replied, gently touching her shoulder. I knocked on the door 3 times. Slow footsteps approached from the other side, and the door opened to reveal a thin man with graying hair and hollow eyes. He was clearly recovering from illness, but there was something familiar in his features that echoed in the 3 sisters. William Hartwell looked at us with initial confusion, then his eyes fixed on Isabel's face. Color drained from his cheeks, and he held on to the doorframe. Isabel? His voice was a broken whisper. Dad, she replied, and for the first time since I met her, I saw tears in Isabel's eyes. The reunion that followed was a mix of joy, anger, and confusion. William hugged Isabel as if she might disappear again, while she alternated between sobs and indignant questions about why he hadn't looked for them. She told me you had left, he kept repeating. Said you didn't want to live with me anymore, that you had found a better life. And you believed it? Isabel pulled away, familiar anger gleaming in her eyes. You believed we would just abandon you? William seemed to have aged 10 years in a few minutes. I was sick, confused, and part of me thought maybe you were better off away from a father who could barely support his family. The pain in his voice was palpable. I looked around the simple cabin, noticing the scarcity of supplies and the extreme simplicity of the furniture. William Hartwell was clearly a man struggling to survive. alone care for 3 young daughters. "Where are Victoria and Sophia?" he asked, his anxious eyes sweeping the area behind us. "Sophia is sick," I explained. "Pneumonia. She's being treated by the doctor in Pine Ridge." William's face paled even more. "Pneumonia? How is she?" "She'll recover," Isabel said quickly. "The doctor said it will be a matter of 1 or 2 weeks. And Victoria? She's taking care of Sophia. She took on the role of mother after Mama died." William sat down heavily in a chair near the fireplace. "What a terrible father I've been. I let one daughter take care of the others, then allowed a lying woman to take them from me." "You didn't know," I said, sitting in an opposite chair. "Widow Hartwell carefully manipulated the situation." "She sold us," Isabel said abruptly. "She sold us at a public auction as if we were cattle." William stood up so quickly that he knocked over the chair. "Sold? What do you mean sold?" Isabel told the whole story. The auction, my intervention, the journey here. William listened in growing silence, fists clenched, breathing becoming more labored as his rage intensified. "I'll kill her," he said finally, his voice low but full of fury. "I'll go back to Welton and—" "You won't," I interrupted firmly. "You're still recovering, and your daughters need you here. Widow Hartwell will have to face her own conscience." "Marcus is right, Dad," Isabel agreed. "Revenge won't undo what happened, but being here, taking care of us, that can heal some wounds." William looked at his daughter with eyes full of regret. "Can I try to be the father you deserve, even after failing so completely?" "We all fail, Dad. But we're still here. We can still choose to do better." We spent the rest of the morning talking, filling in gaps from months of separation. William told us about his slow recovery, about the nights he spent wondering if his daughters were safe. Isabel shared the horrors of living with her stepmother, the feeling of abandonment, the constant fear that they weren't wanted. It was midday when we decided to go back to Pine Ridge. William insisted on coming with us, despite still being weak. He wanted to see Victoria and Sophia. He needed to make sure they were okay. The walk back was slow, with frequent stops for William to rest. I could see that the effort was taking its toll, but also that nothing would stop him from seeing his other daughters. Victoria was looking out the clinic window when we arrived. Her cry of joy upon seeing her father was audible from outside. She ran to the door, and the embrace they shared was intense enough to bring tears to any observer's eyes. "Dad," she sobbed. "We thought you had died. We thought we'd never see you again." "I'm here," William murmured, stroking his daughter's hair. "I'm here, and I'll never let anyone separate our family again." Sophia was awake when we entered the makeshift room. Despite her fever, her eyes lit up when she saw her father. William knelt beside the bed, taking his daughter's small hand in his. "My little girl," he whispered. "How you've grown." "Dad," Sophia said, her voice weak but clear. "I knew you weren't dead. I always knew." "How did you know?" "Because I could still feel you in my heart. If you had died, I would have felt the emptiness." The simplicity and sincerity of her answer broke something in William. He rested his head on the edge of the bed and cried, not just tears of relief, but of regret, of lost time, of almost squandered opportunities. I watched that family reunion from the corner of the room, feeling a mix of satisfaction and melancholy. My part was done. The 3 sisters were reunited with the father they thought they had lost. Technically, there was no longer any reason for me to stay. But when Victoria looked in my direction, her eyes seemed to ask a silent question. A question I wasn't ready to answer yet. The doctor interrupted the moment, insisting that Sophia needed rest. William refused to leave her bedside, so we made improvised arrangements for the whole family to stay close while Sophia recovered. It was almost 5 in the afternoon when Victoria found me outside the clinic. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked directly. "Why do you think that?" "Because you have that look of someone saying goodbye, as if your task is complete." I looked at the mountainous landscape, at the trees swaying in the afternoon breeze. "You don't need me anymore. You found your father. You're safe. Sophia will recover." "What if we don't want you to leave?" The question surprised me. "Victoria, I'm not talking about obligation or gratitude," she interrupted. "I'm talking about choice. During these days, you became part of our story, part of our family, even if temporarily. I'm not the type to stay in one place for long. Maybe it's time to try to be." I didn't have an immediate answer for that. The idea of settling down, of stopping running from the past, was simultaneously tempting and terrifying. Think about it, Victoria said, touching my arm gently. You don't have to decide today or tomorrow, but think about the possibility that sometimes the journey ends not when you reach a destination, but when you find a place worth stopping your travels. She went back inside, leaving me alone with complicated thoughts and a future that, for the first time in years, wasn't completely predetermined. Time in Pine Ridge moved at a different pace, almost as if the outside world had been suspended. Sophia's recovery required patience and constant care, and in that small room, smelling of medicine and old wood, our story truly began to transform. William's presence gave the sisters something they didn't know they'd lost: the feeling of belonging, of having solid ground to stand on. I observed it all somewhat from the sidelines, doing small favors for the doctor or helping Victoria with daily chores, but mostly reflecting on what it truly meant to belong in a place like this. For days I stayed in that uncertainty, helping where I could, ready to leave at any moment, but never actually taking the step to go. It was as if an invisible thread connected me to that family, and with each passing day, it seemed to grow stronger. Gradually, Sophia regained color in her cheeks and strength in her body. Isabel gained confidence in caring for her sister, and with each improvement, let out proud smiles that I hadn't seen before. Victoria took charge of organizing the makeshift home, guiding everyone calmly but firmly. William felt guilty, but he was always present, learning to listen to his daughters and respect their decisions. He was a different man from who he likely was before his illness and his stepmother's lies. In the first week, we received news from Welton from a passing cowboy. Widow Hartwell, realizing her control over the Hartwell estate was gone, left behind only debts and a bad reputation. No one in town seemed to miss her, and for a moment, I realized that piece of our story was finally closed. With Sophia recovering, conversations turned to the future. It was as if everyone knew that this journey couldn't end simply with the reunion. We needed to find, together, a new meaning for everything we had been through. It was on one of those clear blue afternoons, sitting around the doctor's table, that Victoria brought up the proposal that would change everything. We have a choice before us. We can try to go back to Welton, but we know nothing awaits us there but the past. Or we can create something new here. Isabel reacted immediately, as she always did. New how? We have no home, no money, no friends in this place. We still have a family back, Victoria replied, looking at each of us. And we have each other. We can start over and make this place a home, for real. William agreed, though his voice was still shaky. I never want to live separated from you again. If this is my daughter's wish, I'm all for it. Sophia, her voice still hoarse, said what we all felt. I want a place where no one else can take us from each other. The decision was made. It was time to put down roots, to transform pain and searching into something beautiful and real. The doctor, who had grown fond of the family, offered to sell them a piece of land nearby and even help build a new house with the help of local residents. It was a possible fresh start, and more than that, it was a choice. Over time, the sisters became known in the region. Victoria organized small gatherings for women from neighboring farms, helping them share experiences and divide tasks. Isabel began working as a horse trainer, showing that her strength and determination were not limits but talents. Sophia, once fully recovered, helped in the doctor's office, developing a natural gift for caring for the sick and children. The space we created ended up attracting, almost unintentionally, other women in similar situations. A young woman named Annie arrived one night, fleeing an arranged marriage. Then came 2 orphan sisters from a distant farm, and slowly the place became a refuge for those who needed to start over. It was Victoria who suggested one day on the porch, we could formalize this, turn our home into a sanctuary where every woman who arrives here knows she can choose her own destiny. The proposal was met with enthusiasm. William helped build extra rooms with the neighbors, and soon the place was known in the surroundings as Hartwell House. It wasn't an orphanage, nor a convent. It was a space of choice, where no one imposed rules beyond respect and solidarity. As I helped raise the roof of the new room, I thought about everything that had happened since that auction. I knew that if someone asked me, I wouldn't be able to properly explain how I ended up there. Maybe life is truly made of coincidences and decisions that we only understand looking back. When the house was ready, we decided to have a kind of ceremony to mark the new phase. It wasn't a conventional wedding, but a celebration of freedom and each woman's choice. Victoria meticulously prepared everything. Wildflowers gathered from the field, a table full of food made by everyone, and ribbons in the guests' hair. Annie brought a cake she baked herself, and the orphaned sisters sang a song learned from their grandmother. That day, Victoria wore a simple blue dress, her hair tied back with white ribbons. Before the ceremony, she called me aside. "You know you don't have to stay, Marcus. There are no obligations between us. But if you choose to stay, I want you to know it's by choice, not by debt." I didn't know what to say. I had never stayed anywhere by choice. I had always been passing through, like a wind that finds no shelter in the trees. But there, looking at Victoria and the sisters, I realized that, for the first time, I wanted to stay. "I choose you, and I choose to stay," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. At the ceremony, each of the sisters made a symbolic declaration, not just for themselves, but for all the women present. Victoria spoke about the courage of making choices and sealed her commitment to me, not as someone surrendering, but as someone walking alongside. Isabel took a red sash and tied it to her arm, a symbol that she was transforming her anger into strength to rebuild her own story. Sophia sang a song she wrote herself, using the voice that had always been so shy until then, showing that she was no longer just the fragile youngest, but someone capable of inspiring others. William, moved, toasted the freedom of his daughters and the future of Hartwell House. The doctor, who had become his close friend, reminded everyone that not every family is born of blood, but of care and choice. By late afternoon, with everyone gathered around the table, I felt that this was the true end of our journey. There was no more fear, no more secrets, just the feeling that, finally, no one else would be treated as property, but as someone worthy of respect and love. The following weeks were hard work, but filled with a quiet joy. The house welcomed more visitors, women seeking shelter, orphaned children, men who wanted to learn to respect those they loved. The circle grew, and with it the sense of community. Victoria organized reading and writing classes for the girls in the region. Isabel started caring for sick animals from neighboring farmers in exchange for provisions. Sophia became a permanent helper to the doctor, and even William found purpose teaching young men how to work the land. My part, I slowly discovered, wasn't as a savior, but as a partner. I do what I can, teach what I know, but mostly I learn from them every day. The past with its scars didn't disappear, but it stopped being a prison. It became a bridge. It reminds us of what we suffered, but also shows how much we managed to overcome. One late afternoon, as I walked down the dirt road, I saw Sophia running after chickens in the yard, Isabel riding fast across the field, and Victoria sitting on the porch, writing in her new journal. William was mending a fence with two young men from the village, laughing loudly as he hadn't in years. I felt part of something bigger. It wasn't fame, nor glory, nor wealth, but it was real, and it was mine. From time to time, letters arrived from distant people asking for shelter or help. Hartwell House became a symbol. Women who had passed through sent news, thanked us, told of their achievements. The place, once a scene of suffering, was now synonymous with hope and new beginnings. Sometimes I think of my sister Sarah. I imagine that, somewhere, she also found a safe path. Maybe someone did for her what I did for Victoria, Isabel, and Sophia. Or perhaps, by creating this refuge, I am taking care of her in my own way through every woman who finds shelter under this roof. Time passed, and Hartwell House became well established. There was no longer the feeling of urgency, of escape, of lurking danger. Everyone had their roles, their routines, their small joys. The breakfast table was filled with voices, laughter, and plans for the future. On one of Sophia's birthdays, we organized an old-fashioned party. People came from all over the region, each bringing a dish, a memory, a song. Sophia, now recovered and full of energy, danced with the children late into the night. Victoria and I exchanged knowing glances, while William played the harmonica, and Isabel taught the boys how to lasso calves in the yard. Looking at that scene, I realized that built was more than a house, It was a home, a place where the marks of the past didn't matter, but rather what each person chose to be from then on. One evening, Victoria sat beside me on the porch, wrapped in the blanket her old stepmother had despised. We sat in silence, listening to the crickets chirping and the distant bleating of sheep. "Remember that first morning on the road when everything seemed uncertain?" she asked. "I do. I thought you were going to hit me after what I revealed about your father." She smiled. "Sometimes I still think I should have," she joked, then grew serious. "Thank you for believing we deserved more, for risking your own life to give us a chance." I paused before replying. "You gave me something too, a family, and a second chance to be a better person." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Are you going to stay? As long as you want me here." "I'll always want you," she said, and at that moment, I was sure that finally I had found my place in the world. The following autumn, we received a visit from Sheriff Morrison, accompanied by his wife. He brought news from Welton, good and bad. The town still bore the marks of past choices, but gradually men and women were changing the way they looked at their daughters, sisters, and wives. What happened to the Hartwell sisters became a story told at fairs, and knowing that they had prospered only helped to increase the prestige and respect for the women in the region. Victoria spoke to the sheriff and visitors, explaining that freedom wasn't just about not being sold, but about being able to build one's own story. Isabella, not hiding her emotion, told how the hatred she felt for her stepmother had now transformed into a desire to protect other girls at risk. Sophia summed it all up simply, "Here, everyone can be who they want to be. That's all I asked for." In the following years, more families began to copy the example of Hartwell House. Other refuges, other homes, emerged in other towns. The West, so marked by the idea of possession and conquest, was also becoming a place of renewal and solidarity. And I, who arrived as a wanderer, became part of this land. I own nothing, but I belong to everything. I find joy in the small things, the bleating of sheep, the smell of fresh bread in the morning, the voices of children running in the yard. Last winter, a fierce storm left everyone trapped in the house for days. Without power or communication, we relied only on each other to weather the storm. We cooked together, told stories by the fireplace, relived the journey from Welton. No one complained. Everyone knew that as long as they were together, nothing would be impossible to overcome. When the sun finally broke through the clouds after the snowstorm, I went out to look at the silver field of ice. Victoria joined me, wrapping her hand in mine. "Look closely," she said, pointing to the house full of life behind us. "None of this would have existed if we hadn't had the courage to defy fate. And if we hadn't chosen to trust each other," I completed. She smiled. "The beginning of the journey was hard, but the crossing was worth every step. We built something no one can take from us." I stood there, side by side with her, feeling the cold wind and, paradoxically, the warmth of truly belonging. There were no more ghosts from the past haunting me. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, that didn't matter. Because whatever the path, I would no longer walk it alone. And so, with time, the story of the Hartwell sisters and that aimless wanderer ceased to be just a painful memory of what we suffered, and became a symbol of what is possible when courage, solidarity, and choice are greater than any oppression. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to access more stories like this. The West remained vast, beautiful, and full of challenges. But in that corner of the land, a new tradition was born, that of care, dignity, and shared freedom. Hope, finally, was no longer a distant dream. It was a way of living every day together as a family by choice. And for me, Marcus Sterling, that finally was a home.